You can't destroy HOA property. This road is mine.
Ma'am, his demolition permit is valid. Step away immediately.
There is nothing quite like the symphony of a 40-ton Caterpillar D9 bulldozer shifting into high gear. While most people wake up to the chirping of birds, Brenda, the tyrannical president of the Oak Creek HOA, woke up to the sound of her million-dollar clubhouse turning into premium mulch. My name is Arthur Pendleton, and for 55 years, I lived a quiet, undisturbed life on 42 acres of dense, beautiful pine forest just outside of Denver, Colorado. The property, known to my family as Pine Ridge, was purchased by my grandfather back in 1968. It was a rugged slice of heaven, accessible only by a half-mile dirt and gravel driveway we called Miller's Lane, which connected our wooded retreat to the main county highway. For decades, the only neighbors I had were the elk, the owls, and my golden retriever, Buster. That peace was entirely shattered in 2018. A massive corporate developer bought the 300 acres of rolling pasture that completely surrounded the lower half of my property. Almost overnight, the quiet plains were transformed into a chaotic construction zone. The developer brought in fleets of earth movers, paving over the natural prairie grass to build Oak Creek Estates, a sprawling, sterile, cookie-cutter community of 600 luxury homes. Legally, I couldn't stop them. It wasn't my land. However, when the developers first drew up their blueprints, they realized my private driveway, Miller's Lane, cut directly through the eastern edge of their new subdivision. The developers' lawyers tried to buy me out, offering me a hefty sum to pack up and leave so they could incorporate my 40 acres into their master plan. I politely told them to go to hell. Because my grandfather had been meticulous with his paperwork, Miller's Lane was protected by an ironclad grandfather deed. It wasn't just an easement. I owned the 50-foot wide strip of land that the road sat on in fee simple, stretching all the way to the highway. The developer had no choice but to build around me. They erected their fancy brick entrance signs, planted their manicured hedges, and built their pristine cul-de-sacs right up to the very edges of my dirt road. For a few years, things were relatively quiet. The developer finished the neighborhood, went bankrupt on an unrelated commercial project, and handed complete control of Oak Creek Estates over to the newly formed Homeowners Association. Enter Brenda Carmichael. Brenda was a woman who clearly felt she had been denied her rightful place as a global dictator and decided to take out her frustrations on a suburban neighborhood. She was elected HOA president in 2023, and her reign of terror began instantly. She had perfectly helmeted blonde hair, walked with a clipboard practically glued to her hand, and was known to literally measure the height of residents' grass with a wooden ruler. The problem was, Brenda fundamentally did not understand property law. She looked at a map of Oak Creek, saw my gravel road cutting through her neighborhood, and decided I was a nuisance that needed to be brought to heel. Our first interaction happened on a humid Tuesday afternoon. I was driving my 2004 Ford F-250, a reliable, muddy, dented workhorse down Miller's Lane toward the highway. Brenda was standing right on the edge of my road, waving her clipboard at me like a traffic cop. I rolled down my window, the diesel engine rumbling. "Can I help you?" I asked, turning down the radio. "I am Brenda Carmichael, president of the Oak Creek HOA," she announced, her voice dripping with unearned authority. "And I am issuing you a formal warning. Commercial-style vehicles are strictly prohibited from being visible from the street, and that mud on your tires is violating the community aesthetic guidelines." I stared at her for a long moment, genuinely thinking it was a prank. "Ma'am, I don't live in Oak Creek. I live up on the ridge. This is my private road. You are driving through Oak Creek," she snapped, adjusting her designer sunglasses. "Therefore, you are subject to the community bylaws. The next time you drive this eyesore through here, you will be fined." I couldn't help it. I laughed. "Have a good day, Brenda," I said, rolling up the window and driving off, leaving her sputtering in a cloud of my exhaust. 2 days later, I received a certified letter in the mail. It was a formal citation from the Oak Creek HOA, fining me $500 for unauthorized operation of a commercial vehicle and another $250 for failure to maintain a paved driveway. I tossed it directly into the fireplace. It was a joke, a piece of worthless paper. But I had severely underestimated the sheer, delusional audacity of Brenda Carmichael. Over the next 3 months, the letters kept coming. The fines compounded. According to Brenda's imaginary ledger, I owed the Oak Creek HOA over $8,500 in violations, late fees, and road maintenance assessments. I ignored every single one of them. I didn't have the time or the patience to argue with a bored suburban tyrant playing government. But in late October, the situation escalated from a petty annoyance to a full-blown war. I had gone into town to pick up some lumber and feed for my chickens. It was getting dark by the time I turned off the county highway to head up Miller's Lane. As my headlights swept across the entrance, I slammed on the brakes. There, blocking my private deeded road, was a massive, brand-new, wrought-iron security gate. It was bolted to heavy brick pillars on either side of the road, complete with a digital keypad and a camera. I put my truck in park and stepped out into the crisp evening air, my blood boiling. Standing on the other side of the gate, looking like a smug conqueror, was Brenda, flanked by 2 of her loyal HOA board members, Todd, a weaselly guy who was technically the vice president, and Susan, the secretary. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, walking up to the iron bars. Brenda smiled, a tight, venomous expression. "Good evening, Arthur. Since you have repeatedly refused to pay your assessments and fines, the board has voted to revoke your access privileges. This road is now secured HOA property. Until you settle your $8,500 balance, you are locked out. Are you out of your mind?" I gripped the bars. "This is my property. You have illegally barricaded my driveway. Give me the code right now, Brenda, or I'm calling the sheriff." "Go ahead," Todd chimed in, puffing out his chest. "We have a neighborhood to protect. You're a squatter on our roads." I pulled out my phone and dialed the county sheriff. 20 minutes later, Deputy Miller, a guy I'd known for 10 years, pulled up with his lights flashing. I explained the situation, expecting him to immediately order Brenda to open the gate or arrest her for trespassing. Instead, Miller sighed, looking at the heavy gate and the brick pillars. "Art, I know this is your road, but she's claiming the developer deeded it to the HOA before the bankruptcy. It's a property dispute. I can't force her to take down a permanent structure without a court order. It's a civil matter." "A civil matter?" I yelled. "She locked me out of my own house." "I'm sorry, Art. You have to take them to court," Miller said apologetically. Brenda was positively glowing with triumph. "You can park on the public shoulder out by the highway, Arthur. I believe it's about a mile walk up to your little cabin. Have a nice hike." That night, I had to pack my groceries into a rucksack, leave my truck on the side of the highway, and hike a mile uphill in the dark, fuming with every step. Brenda had crossed a line. She wanted to play legal games? Fine, I was going to play for keeps. The very next morning, I hiked back down, drove into the city, and walked into the office of David Ross. David was a pit bull of a real estate attorney. He wasn't the kind of lawyer who wrote polite letters. He was the kind who found the jugular and didn't let go. I slammed my grandfather's original 1968 deed and a stack of the HOA's fine letters onto his desk. "They blocked my road, David. I want them destroyed." David reviewed the paperwork, his eyes narrowing. "They built a permanent gate on a deeded fee-simple right-of-way? That's incredibly stupid. We could sue them for the gate easily. But let's make sure we have all our ammunition. I want a completely new, state-of-the-art GPS survey done. The developers went bankrupt, right? When developers rush and go broke, they make mistakes. Let's see what else they got wrong." David hired Greg Mitchell, the best independent surveyor in the state. For 2 weeks, Greg and his team crawled all over my property line and the borders of Oak Creek Estates with $1 million GPS equipment and laser transits. When David called me back into his office 2 weeks later, Greg, the surveyor, was sitting there. He looked like he had just won the lottery and seen a ghost at the same time. "Arthur," David said, a wicked, terrifying grin spreading across his face. "You aren't going to believe this." Greg rolled out a massive, highly detailed topographic map on the conference table. He pointed a pen at the red line designating my property. "When the developer built Oak Creek," Greg explained, "they used an outdated, handwritten map from the 1980s to establish their property lines, completely ignoring the true GPS coordinates of your 1968 deed. Your 50-foot wide access strip doesn't just go straight down the dirt road. Greg traced his pen along the map. The red line of my property jutted sharply to the west near the entrance of the subdivision. See this right here? Greg tapped the paper. This is the brand new $1.2 million Oak Creek Clubhouse. They finished building it 6 months ago. It has a heated pool, a fitness center, and a grand ballroom. I know it, I said. Brenda practically lives there. What about it? David leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Arthur, the developers were sloppy. Over 75% of that clubhouse, including the foundation, the entire west wing, and half the swimming pool, is built directly on your land. The room went dead silent. Wait, I breathed, my heart pounding in my chest. You're telling me the HOA clubhouse belongs to me? Legally? David smirked. It is an unauthorized, unpermitted structure built on your private property. Under Colorado property law, if they refuse to remove it after being given proper notice, it becomes an illegal encroachment. You have the absolute right to have it demolished to restore your land. Brenda Carmichael hadn't just picked a fight with the wrong guy. She had handed me the nuclear launch keys. David and I spent the next 48 hours drafting the most devastating legal document of my life. We didn't file a lawsuit about the Iron Gate. Suing over the gate would take months in civil court, and Brenda would just use the HOA's deep pockets to drag it out. Instead, we went straight for the jugular. David drafted a formal notice to vacate and remove unauthorized structures. It legally informed the Oak Creek HOA that their $1.2 million clubhouse was encroaching on my private property. The notice gave them exactly 30 days to entirely dismantle the building, tear up the foundation, fill in the swimming pool, and remove their iron gate from my road. If they failed to comply within 30 days, the document stated, I would exercise my legal right as the property owner to remove the debris and unauthorized materials myself at the HOA's expense. I didn't mail it. I wanted to see her face. The following Thursday evening, the Oak Creek HOA was holding its monthly board meeting inside the very clubhouse in question. I walked up my road, bypassed the iron gate by hopping the small decorative fence next to it, and strolled right through the double glass doors of the clubhouse. The grand ballroom was packed with about 50 residents. Brenda was standing at a podium, droning on about a proposed ban on certain colors of patio umbrellas. When I walked down the center aisle, the room went quiet. Brenda stopped talking, her eyes flashing with fury. Arthur Pendleton, she hissed into the microphone. You are trespassing on HOA property. Leave immediately, or I will have you arrested. I didn't say a word. I just walked right up to the podium and slapped the heavy, legally notarized manila envelope down in front of her. What is this? She demanded, looking at it like it was radioactive. It's an eviction notice, Brenda, I said loudly, making sure the entire room could hear me. You have 30 days to get off my property. I turned and walked out. Behind me, I heard the rustle of paper, followed by Brenda's shrill, mocking laughter echoing through the microphone. The crazy old man thinks he owns the clubhouse, she announced to the crowd. Laughter erupted from the board members. I just kept walking, a smile playing on my lips. Over the next 30 days, I tracked the situation closely through a neighbor who was sick of Brenda's tyranny and secretly feeding me information. Brenda had taken the notice to the HOA's budget lawyer, a guy who specialized in collecting dues, not complex land disputes. He took one look at my claim, saw the developer's old flawed map, and told Brenda it was a bluff. Brenda doubled down. Not only did she not remove the gate or the clubhouse, but she also sent me 3 more fines for disrupting an official meeting and harassment. Day 30 came and went. The deadline expired at midnight. On day 31, David and I walked into the county clerk's office with the certified GPS survey, the original deed, and proof of the ignored 30-day notice. Because the structure was undeniably on my land and the HOA had refused to address the encroachment, the county building inspector had no choice. They issued me a demolition permit for unauthorized debris removal on my specific parcel. It was entirely legal. It was fully permitted. And it was time. I picked up my phone and called Tommy Tank Sullivan. Tommy and I went way back. He owned the largest heavy excavation and demolition company in the county. Hey, Tommy, I said when he answered. "You still owe me a favor for helping you rebuild that transmission last summer?" "Sure do, Art," Tommy grumbled. "What do you need? Feel like knocking down some drywall today? I've got a fully permitted demo job, but we need to move fast, and we need to move heavy. Say no more. I'll get the big toys." The next morning, at exactly 6 a.m., the dense fog was still clinging to the ground when the ground began to vibrate. I was waiting at the bottom of Miller's Lane, leaning against the public highway guardrail. Coming down the road was a terrifyingly beautiful sight, a convoy of 3 massive diesel flatbed trucks. The lead truck was carrying a Caterpillar 336 excavator with a hydraulic crushing claw. The second truck was hauling a 40-ton Cat D9 bulldozer, its massive steel blade gleaming in the morning light. The third was a fleet of heavy dump trucks. Tommy pulled his lead pickup truck over next to me and rolled down the window. He was grinning from ear to ear, holding a thermos of coffee. "Morning, Art. Got your paperwork?" I held up the clipboard with the county-stamped demolition permit, the GPS survey, and the sheriff's notification. Bulletproof. Tommy looked up the road. About 100 yards ahead, the imposing iron security gate stood locked, blocking the way. Behind it, nestled perfectly in the morning dew, sat the pristine Oak Creek Clubhouse. "We got a problem, Art," Tommy said, pointing a thick finger. "Gate's locked." I looked at the gate, then looked at the massive D9 bulldozer sitting on the trailer. "Tommy," I said calmly, "that gate is unauthorized scrap metal situated on my private property. Run it over." Tommy's grin widened into something downright feral. He grabbed his radio. "All right, boys, unload 'em. We're going through the front door." 5 minutes later, the D9 bulldozer rolled off the ramp, its diesel engine letting out a roar that shook the leaves off the nearby oak trees. The operator shifted into gear and rolled directly up to the iron gate. He didn't even slow down. Crunch. The heavy wrought iron gates folded like tin foil. The brick pillars shattered, sending chunks of masonry flying into the pristine flower beds. The bulldozer rolled right over the wreckage, flattening the keypad and the security camera into the dirt. The convoy rolled through the dust, rumbling up my private road, before cutting a sharp left right across the manicured HOA lawn, leaving deep, muddy tank treads in the perfect grass. The massive machines came to a halt directly in front of the clubhouse. The excavator raised its massive hydraulic claw into the air, casting a long, terrifying shadow over the building's grand entrance. The front doors of the clubhouse burst open. Brenda Carmichael ran out into the chilly morning air, wearing a pink fuzzy bathrobe, curlers in her hair, and a look of absolute, unadulterated horror on her face. Brenda Carmichael bolted out of the heavy glass double doors of the pristine Oak Creek Clubhouse, her face contorted into a mask of absolute, unadulterated horror. She was wearing a violently pink, aggressively fuzzy bathrobe that clashed spectacularly with the pale yellow curlers tightly wound into her blonde hair. Her fuzzy slippers slapped against the immaculate, geometrically perfect concrete walkway as she sprinted toward the massive, idling machines. The chilly morning air seemed to crystallize the frantic, shrill tone of her voice as she began screaming at the top of her lungs, her arms flailing wildly in the air like a deranged windmill. "Stop! Stop right now!" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the perfectly painted suburban facades of the surrounding luxury homes. "Turn those monstrous machines off immediately. You are trespassing on Oak Creek Homeowners Association property. I am the president, and I demand you power down those engines this instant, or I will have every single one of you thrown into federal prison." Tommy Tank Sullivan, sitting comfortably high up in the enclosed, climate-controlled cab of the colossal Caterpillar 336 excavator, simply leaned out of his side window, a bewildered but deeply amused grin plastered across his weathered face. He looked down at the screaming woman in the pink bathrobe, then casually glanced over at me where I was standing near the crushed, mangled remains of the iron security gate. I gave him a slow, deliberate nod. Tommy casually reached for the control sticks, pulled back slightly, and the excavator's massive hydraulic arm raised higher into the crisp morning sky, the terrifying iron claw opening and closing with a menacing, metallic screech that completely drowned out Brenda's hysterical ranting. I took my time walking up the driveway. I strolled past the flattened, completely obliterated iron security gate, my boots crunching heavily on the broken bricks and shattered camera lenses that now littered the expensive, imported decorative gravel. I approached Brenda, holding the thick, heavy clipboard in my right hand. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, my voice calm, steady, and dangerously quiet against the rumbling backdrop of the 40-ton D9 Bulldozer's roaring diesel engine. "I did try to warn you. 30 days ago, to be exact. I told you that your beautiful, million-dollar building was sitting illegally on my privately owned land. I legally ordered you to remove it. You laughed in my face, threw my formal legal notice away, and decided to issue me more fraudulent fines. So, since you completely failed to clean up the unauthorized garbage left on my property, I have decided to clean it up myself." Brenda's eyes practically bulged out of her skull. She looked from me to the gigantic excavator casting a long, dark shadow over the clubhouse roof, and back to me. "You are completely insane, Arthur. This is a $1.2 million community facility. You cannot just bring heavy construction equipment and destroy a building because of some imaginary property line dispute. I am calling the police. I am calling the sheriff. I am going to see you locked in a tiny cell for the rest of your miserable, pathetic life." She frantically dug into the deep pockets of her fuzzy pink bathrobe, retrieved her shiny new smartphone, and began violently stabbing her beautifully manicured fingers at the screen to dial 911. "Please do," I replied, a wide, genuine smile spreading across my face. "Tell them to send Deputy Miller. He already knows the way." Within 10 minutes, the previously quiet, sleepy neighborhood of Oak Creek Estates had completely transformed into a chaotic, buzzing circus. The deafening, rhythmic rumbling of the heavy diesel engines had violently awakened the residents. Dozens of people began pouring out of their expensive, cookie-cutter houses, wearing an array of pajamas, sweatpants, and hastily thrown-on winter coats. They gathered tentatively on the manicured sidewalks, murmuring nervously, pointing their cell phones to record the unbelievable spectacle unfolding before their sleepy eyes. Then, the piercing wail of police sirens cut through the cold morning air. 3 county sheriff's cruisers came tearing down the main suburban street, their bright red and blue emergency lights flashing aggressively against the pale morning fog. The cruisers skidded to a halt just outside the crushed perimeter of the front gate, their tires squealing sharply on the pavement. Deputy Miller stepped out of the lead vehicle, adjusting his heavy-duty belt, his jaw dropping open in utter disbelief as he took in the sheer scale of the situation. He saw the completely flattened million-dollar iron security gate, the deep, muddy bulldozer tank treads tearing through the pristine, perfectly manicured emerald green lawn, and the colossal excavator looming threateningly over the lavish clubhouse roof. Brenda immediately ran toward the officers, tears of sheer, unbridled fury streaming down her flushed cheeks, her pink bathrobe flapping wildly in the cold wind. "Arrest him, deputy!" she shrieked, pointing an accusing, trembling finger directly at my chest. "Arrest this lunatic immediately. He has completely destroyed our expensive security gate. He is trespassing on our private community land, and he is threatening to demolish our brand new clubhouse. Shoot him if you have to. Just stop him." Deputy Miller held up both hands, trying to calm the hysterical woman down. He walked over to me, looking incredibly tired and deeply stressed. "Arthur," he sighed heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Please, for the love of everything holy, tell me you have a legal explanation for this absolute madness." I didn't say a single word. I simply handed him the heavy clipboard. Miller took it and began carefully reviewing the thick stack of meticulously prepared documents. He read through the certified, court-recognized GPS topographic survey created by the state's top surveyor. He reviewed the original, grandfathered 1968 deed, clearly establishing my fee-simple ownership of the land. He read the 30-day legal eviction notice that had been formally served and ignored. Finally, he reached the golden ticket, the officially stamped, legally binding, brightly colored county demolition permit explicitly authorizing the immediate removal of all unauthorized structures and debris located on my specific, clearly defined parcel of land. Miller stood there in absolute silence for a long, agonizing minute. He pulled the radio off his shoulder strap and contacted the Central County dispatcher to verify the building permit number. The entire neighborhood watched in breathless, terrifying silence, the only sound being the low, rhythmic, menacing rumble of Tommy's heavy diesel machinery idling in the background. "Copy that, dispatch," Miller finally said, his voice cracking slightly over the radio. "Permit is fully verified and currently active." Miller slowly lowered his radio. He looked at Brenda, who was practically vibrating with impatient, self-righteous anticipation. Then he looked at me, a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Mrs. Carmichael," Deputy Miller said, his tone shifting into a sharp, authoritative, no-nonsense police command. "I need you to step back from the heavy machinery and vacate the immediate area right now." Brenda blinked, her brain completely short-circuiting as she failed to comprehend the officer's words. "What? What are you talking about?" "Arrest him! He is destroying our neighborhood!" "Mrs. Carmichael," Miller repeated, his voice growing significantly louder and firmer. "Mr. Pendleton possesses a valid, legally binding county demolition permit. He possesses a certified GPS land survey proving that the left half of this clubhouse, the entire swimming pool area, and the front entrance gate were all illegally constructed directly on his private property. He gave your association a legal 30-day notice to remove the structures, which you actively chose to ignore. He is entirely within his legal rights to tear it down. Now, you need to step away, or I will be forced to place you under arrest for legally interfering with a permitted demolition site and trespassing on his private land." The absolute look of profound, soul-crushing devastation that washed over Brenda Carmichael's face was something I will vividly remember and cherish for the rest of my natural life. She stood frozen, completely paralyzed by the horrifying realization that her absolute power had been utterly stripped away. "No," she whispered, her voice suddenly trembling, fragile and weak. "No, that's impossible. Our lawyer said he was bluffing. Our lawyer said it was a stupid, pathetic bluff." "He gave you terrible legal advice, ma'am," Miller replied bluntly. "Now please, step back behind the caution tape." When Brenda stubbornly refused to move, continuing to stand defiantly in front of the massive bulldozer tracks while screaming incoherently about community bylaws and aesthetic guidelines, Deputy Miller didn't hesitate. He swiftly stepped forward, grabbed her arms, firmly spun her around, and snapped a pair of cold steel handcuffs onto her wrists. The watching crowd of residents gasped in collective shock as the dictatorial HOA president, still wearing her fuzzy pink bathrobe and yellow curlers, was marched unceremoniously across the ruined lawn and placed into the back of the police cruiser. I looked up at Tommy, who was practically bouncing in his seat with excitement. I raised my hand high into the air and forcefully brought it down, giving the final, undisputed signal. The demolition began. It was a beautiful, chaotic, deafening symphony of pure destruction. Tommy's massive excavator lurched forward, its steel tracks grinding aggressively against the perfect concrete walkway. The hydraulic arm swung in a deadly, calculated arc, and the heavy iron claw smashed directly into the elegant, expensive roof of the clubhouse's grand ballroom. High-end architectural shingles, shattered wooden trusses, and thick fiberglass insulation exploded outward in a massive cloud of gray dust. Crash! The sound of cratering drywall and snapping lumber echoed like cannon fire across the quiet valley. The massive iron claw mercilessly ripped away the entire front facade of the West Wing, exposing the lavish, meticulously decorated interior to the cold morning air. Through the gaping, jagged hole in the building, I could clearly see the expensive, imported crystal chandelier swinging wildly before the ceiling completely gave way, sending the glittering fixture crashing down into a devastating pile of pulverized plaster and splintered hardwood floors. Simultaneously, the enormous 40-ton Caterpillar D9 bulldozer roared into aggressive action. It barreled toward the heavily fenced-in, luxurious outdoor swimming pool area. The colossal steel blade effortlessly ripped through the expensive decorative wrought iron fencing like it was made of flimsy paper. The machine violently plunged over the concrete edge, its massive weight instantly crushing the expensive imported patio tiles. It drove its blade deep into the side of the heated pool, shattering the thick concrete retaining wall with an earth-shattering crack. Thousands upon thousands of gallons of heavily chlorinated, crystal-clear water violently rushed out of the gaping wound in the pool's side. The massive, unstoppable tidal wave of water completely flooded the perfectly manicured, emerald green HOA lawns, washing away the expensive decorative mulch, drowning the meticulously planted flower beds, and turning the pristine landscaping into a massive, bubbling pit of thick brown mud. For 3 glorious, chaotic hours, the heavy machines worked in relentless tandem. They systematically tore down every single square inch of the clubhouse that sat on my side of the property line. By the time Tommy finally powered down the deafening engines, the once glorious $1.2 million Oak Creek clubhouse looked as though it had been violently sliced completely in half by a giant, jagged butcher knife. The entire left wing, the grand ballroom, the state-of-the-art fitness center, and the lavish swimming pool had been reduced to a massive, steaming mountain of twisted metal, shattered concrete, and pulverized drywall. The immediate aftermath of the demolition was nothing short of a complete legal and financial bloodbath for the Oak Creek Homeowners Association. As the thick clouds of plaster dust finally settled over the ruined, severed remnants of the clubhouse, the true, horrifying reality of the situation rapidly began to dawn on the hundreds of shocked residents who had gathered to watch the morning's spectacular events. Brenda Carmichael was eventually released from police custody later that same afternoon, but her dictatorial reign of terror over the suburban neighborhood was instantly and irrevocably over. The neighborhood, previously terrified of her wrath, was now united in a state of absolute, burning fury. The HOA's desperate, scrambling lawyers immediately attempted to file a massive, multi-million-dollar lawsuit against me for the destruction of their precious community property. They confidently strutted into the courtroom, aggressively demanding millions in punitive damages and claiming I had acted maliciously. But my attorney, the brilliant and ruthless David Ross, was incredibly well prepared. He completely dismantled their flimsy arguments in front of the stern-faced judge, presenting the flawless GPS land surveys, the unassailable property deeds, and the documented proof that Brenda had maliciously ignored a legally binding 30-day eviction notice. The judge didn't just immediately throw their ridiculous lawsuit completely out of court. He actually issued a scathing, highly critical reprimand against the HOA board for gross incompetence, blatant trespass, and illegal land encroachment. But David wasn't even close to being finished. We aggressively countersued the Oak Creek Homeowners Association. We sued them for the full, extravagant $85,000 cost of hiring Tommy's heavy demolition crew to remove their illegal garbage from my land. We sued them for the thousands of dollars in steep legal fees we had accrued. We sued them for the severe emotional distress of being illegally locked out of my own private property by their ridiculous, unauthorized iron gate. Desperate to avoid complete financial ruin, the HOA frantically tried to file a massive claim with their corporate property insurance provider. They hoped the insurance would cover the immense cost of rebuilding the destroyed half of the clubhouse and pay off our rapidly mounting legal judgments. However, the insurance company dispatched their own sharp-eyed adjusters, reviewed the extensive legal documents, and quickly discovered the truth. The insurance company categorically denied the massive claim, citing a strict gross negligence and illegal acts clause in their policy. Because the HOA had actively chosen to construct a building on land they did not own, and because they had willfully ignored a legal eviction notice, the insurance company legally washed their hands of the entire catastrophic mess. The Oak Creek Homeowners Association was entirely on its own, and they were completely, hopelessly bankrupt. To cover my massive legal judgments, pay for the staggering demolition costs, and fund the emergency structural repairs required to keep the remaining, unsliced half of the ruined clubhouse from completely collapsing into the dirt, the HOA was forced to levy a devastating, mandatory special emergency assessment on every single home in the neighborhood. Every family in Oak Creek Estates was suddenly forced to write a check for nearly $15,000 just to keep the neighborhood association from being completely dissolved by the state. The resulting neighborhood outrage was explosive, immediate, and utterly deafening. An emergency, highly volatile community meeting was rapidly organized in a local high school gymnasium, as their precious clubhouse was now a condemned, highly dangerous disaster zone. The furious, screaming residents aggressively recalled Brenda Carmichael and every single one of her sycophantic board members in a unanimous, overwhelmingly hostile vote. But losing her precious title of president was merely the beginning of Brenda's miserable downfall. Realizing that her shocking arrogance, profound stupidity, and blatant disregard for basic property law had directly cost the community millions of dollars, several incredibly wealthy, highly litigious homeowners banded together and launched a massive, devastating civil lawsuit directly against Brenda personally, suing her for gross fiduciary mismanagement and severe breach of duty. Facing complete personal bankruptcy, mounting legal bills, and the daily intense burning hatred of every single neighbor who walked past her neatly manicured lawn, Brenda Carmichael was entirely broken. 3 months after the dramatic demolition of the clubhouse, I watched from my porch as a bright red moving truck backed into her driveway. She was forced to abruptly sell her beautiful luxury home at a massive, painful financial loss just to pay her towering legal debts, fleeing the neighborhood in utter disgrace and total humiliation. As for me, I finally got my long-awaited peace and quiet back. I took the hefty, substantial settlement money I legally extracted from the shattered HOA and hired a highly professional local paving crew. They completely transformed Miller's Lane, repaving the old, bumpy, muddy dirt road into a perfectly smooth, beautifully graded, private asphalt driveway that stretched gloriously from the main county highway all the way up through the quiet, serene pine trees to my rustic cabin on the ridge. Right at the exact property boundary line, where the HOA's massive, imposing, ridiculous iron gate used to stand in arrogant defiance, I built my own entrance. It isn't a massive, obnoxious, heavily fortified iron barricade designed to keep people out. It is simply a very modest, beautifully crafted, sturdy wooden farm gate, constructed from thick cedar posts. Hanging directly in the center of the wooden gate is a small, polite, but incredibly firm metal sign that reads, "Private property. No HOA jurisdiction. Trespassers will be towed." Sometimes, on very quiet, peaceful Sunday mornings, I slowly pour myself a large, steaming mug of strong black coffee, walk down the smooth, freshly paved surface of Miller's Lane with my golden retriever, Buster, happily trotting by my side, and I stand by my simple wooden gate. I look out over the stark, empty, grassy patch of dirt where the luxurious, $1 million west wing of the Oak Creek Clubhouse used to proudly stand. I listen to the gentle, rustling wind blowing softly through the tall pine trees. I breathe in the fresh, crisp Colorado mountain air, and I smile, knowing that some battles are absolutely, undoubtedly worth fighting. If you loved hearing how one man and a fleet of bulldozers destroyed a tyrannical HOA and their illegal $1 million clubhouse, hit that like button right now. Please subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our crazy true revenge stories. Share this video with anyone who has ever had to deal with a nightmare neighbor in their own life. Leave a comment down below telling us exactly what you would have done.